We have just passed 50,000 subscribers, and I want to say a huge thank you to those of you that watch these videos, subscribe to your channel, and following me on this journey. It has been fun, and we're going to continue. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. This way we can grow the channel and have these videos reach an even larger audience. We'll be taking a look at Apple MacBook Pro running on the regular M series silicon from the current generation M4 all the way back to M1 and see the generational improvement in performance. Let's jump in. I'm ArtIsRight. This video is going to be an encore, a remix of sort. I have released all the M4 generation testing data in my M4 Max comparison video. However, when you have to take a look at a chart with a lot of computers, it can be a lot to really glean the data from. So what I have done is curate a few machines so that we can look at this tight-knit of machine and see more of the generational improvement when we're taking a look at the same family of silicons. Now, with that said, this is probably going to be the last comparison video that I do, falling short of me adding a machine into the testing lineup. Or if you have any suggestions, I'm always all ears. I do read all the comments, so do share with me your thoughts if you like to see something. But I like to wind this down so I can focus on the nano texture display video and also the setup guide for Pro workflow. I think you're going to learn a lot from those too. Now, as usual, I'll be sharing lots of data. Please pause this video so you can analyze the result yourself in addition to the analysis I'll be sharing with you. This channel is fully self-funded and there's one person running it, that is me. So if you find information helpful and you'd like to support the channel, YouTube membership works. Super thanks also works equally as well, and I'll also leave a link to my tip jar if you want to help support the channel. And if the only thing that you can do is subscribe and hitting on that like button, that works equally as well. Now, if you do find these information helpful though, please share this with at least 3 other creative. This way they can choose the right machine that is best suited for their workflow as well. And lastly, I will probably make mistakes in this video, so do be kind in the comments when you do leave them. With that said, we'll be taking a look at a whole bunch of machines, starting with the 14-inch MacBook Pro M4. And this is pretty much what just won the stock configuration, which is really great to see. You get a really great performance out of the gate. However, there's a few things that I do want to point out. Let's take a look at this 14-inch comparison between just the regular M4 and the M4 Pro. Now, if you take a look at these two right now, you're talking about a price delta of $400. And it can seem like it is a huge jump, right? However, if we end up upgrading the memory on the M4 to 24 gigabytes to bring that in parity with the M4 Pro, we're now taking a look at a smaller price jump of only $200. And personally for me, my thought would be, if you're doing this for revenue, you're going to get more from the Pro Silicon, and I generally recommend getting the Pro Silicon over just the regular M4 Silicon any day. Now with this, we're also going to be testing the regular M series from the M1 to the M3. You're also going to see the result from the M4, M4 Max. And I do want to clear something. When I say base, when I say top, this is just referring to the silicon. It's not referring to the machine with like the memory and everything. It's just talking about the silicon. We'll be taking a look at the Pro machine all the way to the M1, the Max as well, including the Mac Studio, M2 Max, M2 Ultra, Mac Mini, the current generation that are out right now, and all the way back to the M1 generation, including a PC that I throw in there for reference. This is an Alienware M18R1. And when I talk about PC, I'm not talking about PC in general. I'm just referring to this specific machine that I have. With that said, configuration and buyer's guide will be towards the end. And one of the things that I talk in every single one of my videos is the SoC segmentation. These are the chip segmentation, and the one we'll be looking at are more consumer leaning. Here's the thing, you really need to ask yourself if you're doing these creative work for revenue or not. If you are, I recommend getting the Pro, the Max, or the Ultra SoC because they are better and well-rounded SoC that can handle any pro task that you throw at it compared to the more consumer leaning one. So that's what I'm going to say about that. As far as upgrade priority goes, to get the most performance per dollar, start out with the amount of memory that you want in the system. From there, you can then choose the silicon family. This would be, for example, going from the regular to the Pro to the Max, etc. Then the storage size. Then lastly, if you still have extra funding left, you can then choose the chip variation. This would be adding more CPU or GPU cores. But the amount of money spent on this, you're probably going to see less of a performance improvement than adding memory into the system when it comes to photography and video workflow. Now, as far as nano texture display go, I'm going to make a separate video talking about this. I love this. You can get really great accurate colors. I tried calibrating this already. And also this time around, Apple have changed a few things in their display that are producing more accurate colors in the long run too. A lot of really great things to talk about here. Again, a separate video coming on that. calibration passed with both software and hardware calibration. Software using Calibrite solution, hardware using BenQ Palette Master Ultimate. I've tested this in all the M4 silicons, M4, M4 Pro, M4 Max. They all pass with flying colors. You can get great colors on day one. And if you get these, especially if you're coming from an Intel one, I recommend setting this up as a new machine, and I will make a guide on how you can do that. I think you're going to get a lot more from this when you don't bring the Intel binary over. This is how you're going to read the specs on all of these machines. And first, let's talk about SSDs. So when it comes to storage, SSD, you can always expand the storage by plugging in an external device, whether that is an SSD, hard drive, NAS, whatever that may be. So the speed on these are going to run just fine. You don't really have to worry about them much. And if you really want to know how fast of an SSD you need to get, I'll leave a link to this video in the description that I made running a test on them. The real answer is that most SSD are going to perform just fine for what you need in your pro workflow. Now, when it comes to RAM, you can't upgrade this. So think about your usage very carefully. And if you run a lot of apps, definitely think about getting more RAM into your system. A few things as a rule of thumb for RAM is you want to keep it the same as your previous machine, not less, keeping it just about the same. And if you're not sure how much RAM you need, restart your computer, launch Activity Monitor, go into the memory tab, and look at the memory pressure before you do anything and start launching those apps and going through your workflow. If you're in the green, you're pretty much good with the amount of RAM that you have. However, if you're in the yellow or red, you want to add more RAM into the system. One app that I use that I really like is iSnap Menu 7, which you can really go in and take a look at history up to like 28 days, which that's one of the big selling features, because there are some other apps that you can use, or one that's kind of like you can use through a terminal, but it doesn't really keep the history of it. And that's the part that I like about this, that it keeps history. Now, I'm super happy that Apple is now including 16 gigabytes of RAM to start out with. You're getting a pretty good machine out of the purchase price, and that's really awesome. You don't have to think about upgrading that many parts anymore. For the relevant machine, the power is set to auto, and for all these machines, especially in the M4 one, is tested on 15.1. The previous generation are tested on 15.0.1. I've also done some reference testing between these two. The data are just fairly close to each other. One last thing that I do want to mention is that there has been a slowing down trend, especially with previous generation silicon, because Mac OS has become more demanding, and also the app has also become more demanding over time too. And that's something that I just noticed it overall. Now let's take a look at Lightroom Classic 1:1 preview for 1000 Sony a7R5 61 megapixel file. When we take a look at this, it scales in a way that makes sense. M4 is faster than M3, M2, M1, and the timing of it, M4 is actually doing really good. 6 minutes faster, that's a pretty good delta right there, and you start to add in a lot more time as you go down. In fact, when you compare this to M1, you're saving about 20 minutes. That's a good amount of time that you're saving there. But my argument still remains, if we take a look at the 14-inch MacBook Pro M4 Pro compared to this one, the M4, we're taking a look at timing of like 30 minutes or so versus like 17 minutes. Not quite half, but you're cutting the time by quite a bit by just adding that $200. So that's just something to think about when you configure these all the same. Now, granted, this is running on 16 gigabytes of memory, but I do want to point that out. Now, the other thing that I do want to point out in my charts is that I always list the system resources that each of these tasks are using, and you can definitely go in and take a look at what they're using with all the charts I'm about to share. Now, when it comes to Lightroom Classic Export, a couple of things are fairly interesting here. M4 and M3, they're performing very similar to each other. Granted, it's about 2 minutes and like 40 seconds apart, but I mean, it's fairly close on this one. However, what I do find interesting is that the M1 is performing faster than M2. This could be a bug in the system, or for some reason Lightroom Classic does not perform well in this one. I did double check the chart, and this is the number that I actually have written down from the test. So most likely when I have a little bit more time after all of these, I'll probably run another test and just double check the data to make sure that these are correct and publish like another correction video per se, because I am really testing a lot of machines here. Now, if we take a look at this one right now, 14-inch MacBook Pro M4 Pro, and if we take a look at the 14-inch MacBook Pro M4, 22 minutes versus 16. So you are saving quite a bit of time. Like I said, if you do this for revenue, consider getting the Pro. If you're doing this as a hobbyist or something, I think M4, they're really great machines. So those are factors to consider. Lightroom Classic HDR Merge, when we take a look at this, M4 and M3 are performing within a margin of error of each other, and the M2 and M1 are just trailing behind because those are slower silicon now relatively to where we are today. Here's the rest of the computer in the lineup for comparison. and Lightroom Classic Panorama Merge. So for this one, we're generating a 314 megapixel DNG file, and there is a bug or something that's happening with this because the only machine that's able to finish this task is the M3, and it's taking 9 minutes 13 seconds. This should be about half. So something's going on here. M4, M2, M1, all these 16 gigabytes machine are not able to finish the task. In previous version of Lightroom and in previous OS, they were, but in this one, no. So something is going on, something wonky about this. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of machines that are not able to finish those tasks. Now, Mac Mini M4, when we take a look at this, this is around 4 minutes and 7 seconds. This is about the number you should be able to expect from all these other machines, especially like this one, but we're not getting those. So something strange is really going on with this particular module. And amazingly enough, one of my followers have also commented like, oh, no wonder why mine wasn't working for a long time. So I appreciate that. You know who you are. All right, Lightroom Classic AI Noise Reduction. For this one, we're going to take a look at one single file. Timing for all of these when it comes to a GPU-based task, they're not too much farther apart. I mean, you're talking about 7 seconds. Now, 7 seconds for one file is not a big deal. 7 seconds for 10 files, for instance, you're talking about like 70 seconds. That starts to add up to a minute. Everything starts to scale up. So think about the scale of the work you're doing as well. I photograph for revenue. I deal with thousands of images at a time. So for me, speed is going to be paramount. If I can shave, not just minutes, I'm talking about seconds out of my workflow, is definitely something that I am going to choose to do over just spending a little more time and going to coffee, because at some point it doesn't make sense anymore. So I just want to point it out. But the way how these are scaling right now, M4, M3, M2, makes sense. In fact, M3 and M2 are performing very similar to each other. M4 just have the faster, I would say, like GPU cores. That's why you're seeing that. Here's the rest of the chart in the lineup. And I do want to point out a few things. So this is the M4 Pro, and this is the regular M4. You can see that they are in a different league altogether. Now, like I said, if you upgrade the memory and everything, it's like $200. So between $200 to $400, you can improve the performance by quite a bit on these machines by shooting the Pro Silicon. Lightroom Classic AI Noise Reduction across multiple different files from different cameras. These are 10 of those files. And when we take a look at these timing, it doesn't really scale up in the way that we think, does it? But it is a little bit faster on the M4 compared to M3. Again, M3 and M2, very similar in terms of performance, and M1 is really starting to trail behind. So if you're running on M1 right now, and you're doing light tasks and so forth, I might consider upgrading this generation, especially on the regular M1 Silicon. If you have the M4 Pro, you have some wiggle room there. I think if you have the M1 Max, you can definitely wait one more generation. So here's the chart with the rest of the machine in the lineup. And I do, again, will point out the 14-inch MacBook Pro versus the 14-inch M4. And these are the timing that we're looking at. Not quite half, but it's cutting by close to half the amount of time required to accomplish this task. So I consider that a win. And like I said, I encourage many of you guys that are a pro to go that route instead. Lightroom Classic AI Sky and Subject Mask. So what I've done is use the AI to select the sky and then adjust and then do the subject selection, make some adjustment on those and sync it to the rest. These are the timing for those. These are just 10 files, but you do see the timing cascade a lot clearly on these one when the machines are, I would say, more of the consumer oriented one. You're seeing that right now. So the time increase between all of these is not really a big deal. Most likely I'm going to revise this test for future, but right now this is what we have for comparison. You can take a look at those. Timing on these, they're only a few seconds apart. They're really not too bad. Now let's take a look at Lightroom. This is a Lightroom desktop version. When we take a look at this, interesting enough, M4 and M3 are performing very similar to each other. And if you ask me, for the most part, depending on the app you're using, if you have an M3 Silicon right now, you could probably keep it. I don't think that is, really worth the jump to get a new computer. That's my personal opinion. However, for this, like M2 makes a lot of sense. And in some of the other tasks I've shown you too, if you have the M2, they're holding off just fine. However, if you're running an M1, that's about like half the amount of time required. I would definitely consider upgrading. Here's the rest of the computer for the chart in the lineup. And let's take a look at Capture One. So for this, we're going to take a look at import. Timing for these, the way how they're scaling is, I would say, about like a minute to like 2 minutes apart between all these tasks. And the way how they're scaling makes sense. M4, M3, it's falling short of making sense. M1 is performing a little bit faster than M2. So there's something going on with like that M2 generation that I have for sure. But again, I've also did double check this data. This is the case. I'll probably run another reference testing just to make sure that we're all like good here and maybe publish a correction video or something. Here's the rest of the machine in the lineup for the chart. Now, when it comes to this, let's take a look at the 14-inch MacBook Pro M4 Pro versus this particular one which is right there. So you're taking a look at 9:51, 8:15. Capture One import, when it comes to a task like these, it doesn't really scale well. Take a look no further than M2 Ultra. I mean, a machine that has literally double the amount of cores on many other Pro machines in there. It's not doing really well, and it's actually falling behind the M4 Max. So not so good on that one. When it comes to export, it's going to take a lot of time. I would say that the M4 to the M2 generation are clustering close together, with the M1 generation really starting to fall behind. So this is hopefully going to help you in making a decision if you want to upgrade or not. Here's the rest of the machine in the lineup, and I do want to point out the 14-inch MacBook Pro, M4 Pro, that's $2,350 versus this one that is $45. This is where you see the performance from the added GPU cores into the system, because this is using GPU only. But most of the time, when you do go to that jump from the regular to the Pro, you start to see the scaling in a ways that, you know, it's really quantifiable that way. Photoshop, I'm using Lloyd Chamber Digital Lloyd Test. These are the 3 tests I'm using of his. Photoshop speed test, 90% RAM allocation, M4 and M3 performing really similar to each other, M2 and M1 falling a little bit behind. M1 is really quite like slower, but I mean, granted, these are just like seconds or milliseconds apart. For the most part, we're not going to notice it, but it's a good way to just look at this from the metrics of just like the CPU performance in general, because most of the time this is a CPU based task. Now this is Photoshop Medium. This is using the RAM, SSD, and also CPU in combination with all of these. And when we take a look at this, the M3 generation is really falling behind on that one. Part of this comes down to the SSD speed and like the M3, the M2 generation, very interestingly enough on those. And you also have the M1s coming somewhat slightly in between. M4 is still at the very top, and the performance in M4 overall is pretty good. Now with 16 gigabyte, this is definitely going to swap onto the SSD, and you start to see those expansion in terms of like performance or slow down as we start to go through it. Here's the rest of the other machine in the lineup, and this is Photoshop Huge. My big thing about this is if you are running on this task, and there are a few that do run this task, before you do comment that like who runs this, I know there are a few people who use this, but this is a good metrics for us. If you do this task day in, day out, upgrade your machine. This is not the machine to run these tasks. If you run this every so often, I don't think it's really that big of a deal, but you do see that M4 is really coming out ahead from the M2, M1, and also M3 generation, with M3 just falling like behind on the rest of those. All right, rest of the machine in the lineup, and I'm also throwing in the Puget test as well. So this is from Puget Bench Score. You can see that it's just really cascading in a way that just really makes sense, from the M4 performing at the top, and it's not really quite double, but it's getting there, you know, like, you know, for the performance of like the M1. So that's factors to consider. Here's the rest of the machine in the lineup for this one. And let's take a look at Final Cut Pro encoder decoder engine. So for this, the encoder decoder engine between this and the Pro Silicon are exactly the same. So the timing you're going to get are going to be very similar to each other. Although the M4 generation, Apple did speed up the encoder decoder engine on H.264 and also H.265, which is the reason why you see that bar being slightly shorter. But otherwise, they're going to cluster in just about where they're going to be. This is H.265, and you can see like the clustering happening right there. It might be a little bit shorter here and there, but there are some clusterings you can see from like the Max to regular Silicon and so forth. Lastly, ProRes 422. M4 is just pulling ahead of all the rest of the machine, and M1 is really starting to fall behind. Here's the rest of the other machine in the lineup for consideration, and let's take a look at AfterEffects. This is using Adobe Benchmark in terms of like timing for this. M4 is pulling out ahead, and the way how this is really cascading down makes a lot of sense, and M1 is taking double the amount of time it takes M4 to really just compete this task. So something to think about there. That's why I say if you're running on the M1, it's time to look at this generation to probably upgrade. After Effects H.264, this is for the rest of the machine, and let's take a look at Premiere Pro. Using Puget Bench, we can see the score cascading. This is in a way that makes sense from the M4, M3, M2, and M1 generation. When it comes to these, you see the score for the rest of the machine. And lastly, let's take a look at DaVinci Resolve. For this, interestingly enough, M1 was not able to complete the task. The reason why is because there are certain tasks that is running and it just keeps crashing and it's just time out on the system. So that's the case. M1, time to upgrade. All right. Those are the rest of the machine in the lineup that you can see the result there. And in fact, it's not just only the 13-inch MacBook Pro M1, but also the Mac Mini M1 is not able to finish the task as well. So now you know. Hopefully this gives you a glimpse into all these machines and how the generational improvement are, especially when you compare from the M4 all the way back to the M1. And we can see a couple of things popping out clearly that M4 is really a leap ahead of many generations. However, in some of the tasks, depending on what you do, if you already have an M3 or even an M2 for that matter, it may not be as big of a jump as you would have expected. This is why I test a variety of tasks for pro photographers so you can kind of see the way how this is going to work out. So you may be wondering which one to choose. I'm going to say this. If you're looking at buying a new machine today, especially if you're just looking at this regular M silicon, I would look at the M4. But if you're already looking at M4 and you're going to do any type of upgrade onto them, I would probably look at the M4 Pro silicon instead. I think those represent a much better value for the price improvement that you're really going to pay into the silicon. Now, if you are upgrading, like I said before, if you're on the M3, M2, you maybe would just hold off on your machine. If you're on the M1, I definitely would jump onto the M4. I probably would not even look at like the M3 generation. So those are for the regular, M silicon. That's my suggestion for those. Or if you have like an M2 or M3, you need to upgrade certain components like SSD or memory or so forth. I think this may be a great generation to really jump in and get a good machine to start out with. Or like I said, go with the Pro. So upgrade priorities, as we talked about before, start with the amount of memory because you're going to get a lot more out of those. Then look at the chip family. From there, look at the SSD storage size and then also the variants within that family. So for instance, if we take a look at this right now, this is just the base M4 comparison to the M4 Pro. We're talking about a price delta right now of $400, and with this you're looking at 16 gigabytes of memory versus 24. Now if we start to bump those up a little bit, when we start to put in, for example, 24 gigabytes of memory is now on par with the M4 Pro, you're really talking about a $200 price delta. And this $200 is getting you a lot in terms of performance when you really jump to this Pro silicon. Now, do you need to upgrade to this one? I would probably say like you can, but I don't think you're going to see as huge of a jump in terms of performance as you would just literally coming from this machine right here over onto this one. That's my personal thought. And this would also apply to any non-pros too, that I think you're going to get a much better machine that has an even longer life if you choose that option. And here's a chart for my recommendation based on the tasks that you do, reading across from good, better, best based on the different tasks that you would use your workflow for. So Lightroom Classic, I think pros are really good. I think better would be the max because these now can really go in and utilize the GPU and you do see the performance gain from it. When it comes to best, I recommend the Ultra. I think, there's really no way to beat the Ultra. Although if you really start to spec out like the max and upgrade the memory like all the way, you're going to get really close to the M2 Ultra for that. When it comes to Photoshop, if you really take a look at just the performance and the number in general, I would say that the M3 Pro is doing really well, M3 Max, and also M4 Max. When it comes to like the better one, I think the M4 Pro is actually doing okay. It's holding its own just fine. But if you take a look at the data really carefully, I think those previous generation ones are really doing just well with like Photoshop. Now, when it comes to Capture One, these are my recommendation. I think that the best machine to look at would probably be the M3 Max or the M4 Max, and I would just look at like the base silicon. Don't even upgrade to the extra GPU cores. You're not going to see that much performance improvement and you can save a lot of money that way. Now for this one, this is the very first time to actually put in the M4 Pro is really a good machine because if you take a look at the data in comparison between those two, there's really not that much of a variation going from the M4 to like the Max. I mean, the only thing you really see the performance improvement, it really comes down to like the export when it's using a lot of GPU because the Max has a lot more than the Pro. So those are just some of the variations to consider. And lastly, when it comes to video workflow, I in general think that you're going to be much better off getting like the better or the best option because of the double encoder decoder engine. So regardless of if you don't even care about the export time, you can use that in transcoding your video and it's going to be able to do that much faster. As far as the good silicon, M4 Pro is a good one. Now when we're talking about these regular computers, it all starts with 16 now. I think that's great. Like I said, personally, between the price jump, I would probably, instead of upgrading the memory, I would just go with the Pro instead, especially if you're looking at the laptop machines. Desktop is an entirely different story. Like the Mac Mini, I would say the gap is a little bit more. However, when you take a look at a laptop, the gap is really not too big. So that would be my recommendation. As far as SSD go, 512, stick to the minimum there. If not, jump to like the 1 terabyte SSD. I think you're gonna get a lot more from those. As far as upgraders, if you have, like a current silicon, the best thing you can do is just circle the one you're on and take a look at a flowchart and see how you can upgrade. Interestingly enough, I put the Max right now upgrading to Ultra, because even though I would probably say that if you really spec out the Max, it will probably perform many tasks close to the Ultra, but I think like in certain tasks, the Ultra will still have a slight edge. You have to also think about this too, that the M4 Max is 2 generations newer than the Ultra, so wait until the Ultra or the M4 Ultra comes. I think that's gonna blow a whole bunch of these out of the water, and I'm so looking forward to that. Anyway, that has been a lot of information. I hope that you find this helpful. Have any questions or comment, leave them below. Give this a like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you're new. I'm Art, and I thank you for your time. And also for the 50,000 subscribers. You guys made this happen. I really appreciate this. Especially for those of you who watch all the way to the end here. Thank you so much.